The Underground Dogman Cult. Dear Scary Stories, I've been holding on to a dogman story that I promised not to talk about for 50 years. Even now I can't tell you exactly where this happened, because that would break my solemn promise that I made with these men half a century ago. I can say that what I'm about to tell you happened more or less in the center of this great country. And it did happen in a place that sort of has legends about underground tunnels and cave systems. I have no idea if this group is still together in any form, but I know that way back then, they were saying to me that the military wanted to kick them out and take over their tunnel systems. But I'm telling you the middle before I've even started explaining the beginning, so let me start over. Like I said, it was 50 years ago, 1973. And I'd moved to a certain place to take a job in my uncle's factory. It was low-level work, but because I was a relative, I was expected to rise up to become management one day. I never did, but that's a later story. In those days, I was enthusiastic about my day job, and everyone thought I had a bright future ahead of me in that place. The bank gave me a loan, and I bought my own 2-bedroom home just outside of town, with only my factory job and my family name as collateral. Now, I had gone to college to study sculpture on the one hand and art history on the other. Those were my passions, carving from stone and learning about the history of people like myself with a passion for the arts. But I knew I'd be poor if I followed those artistic instincts, and so I was on my management training life path. On my very first night sleeping in the new house, I saw a dogman outside my window. I was upstairs going back to bed from the bathroom about 2 or 3 a.m. I looked down onto the backyard to see the biggest and most masculine man I'd ever seen, running across my yard, covered in thick body hair and with a dog or wolf mask on his head. That is, I assumed this was a mask. I ran to the window in time to see him disappearing into the bushes in the back. I did not know that it was not just a streaker, as we used to call nude runners in those days, until a good while later. I think if I had seen the creature for even 2 seconds longer, I would have been able to see that it was too large to be a man. But when you only catch a glimpse of something, you come up with an explanation for it that seems to fit, and then you move on. So I only realized that this was my first sighting of the dogman later on. I knew that I had moved into a part of town where other factory workers lived, and I knew they were working-class people who had not gone to college as I had. So I was very surprised to occasionally get into conversations with various of my neighbors and hear them using terms like the music of the spheres to describe the quiet of the early morning, or mentioning ancient philosophers in contexts that they would then have to explain to the supposedly better educated me. I came to eagerly accept any invitation these men made to me, and I began to socialize with these men whose families may have been considered beneath mine, but whose intellects and breadth of knowledge greatly surpassed those of anyone I had ever encountered before. I don't think any of them had finished college, and some had never gone in the first place. But while I sort of knew the basics of a lot of subjects, it always seemed that they had read multiple books on each subject and could discuss obscure authors as though they were famous and well-known. These men were employed as engineers by my father and grandfather, but they were also well-versed in the arts, and they could discuss mystical and magical concepts on a level that caused me to sit down and take notes. My grandfather, they told me, chose this town for our factory because of this group of engineers, the fathers of the men I was talking to, whom my grandfather regarded as almost magicians. I doubt there were other factories of this size, employing self-taught engineers who never went to college, even all the way back in 1973. So clearly these men were unique, even back in those more genuine times. They were also very strange, just as strange as the long-haired hippie version of me from that year. My father had hoped I would hit it off with those men, and as it turned out, I guess I had. At some point after meeting them, I had another and more frightening encounter with a dogman or werewolf-type creature. This time when I opened my garage door, the creature came bursting out, so close to me that I could smell its musky odor and feel its intense body heat. It was almost twice as tall as I was, or at least that's what it felt like. I tried to scream, but literally nothing came out. I watched it run away before my vocal cords worked again. The thing liked to hide in dark places like a poisonous snake. I was going to have to lock that garage, my basement, everything, just as though I were living in the city, only instead of doing it to protect against robbery, I needed to do it to protect against a mythical monster. Still, I didn't tell anyone about it. It felt too crazy a thing to talk about for some reason. I was already the only long-haired person in the whole company. I didn't want to make my reputation seem any more off the wall than it probably already was. When I would socialize with them, the engineers kept asking each other in front of me if I should be allowed to go down with them to the mines. I finally interrupted them talking as though I weren't there, to say that I was claustrophobic and I didn't really want to visit any mines. The idea of a mine cave-in was one of my deepest fears. I'm even afraid to be inside buildings because they might collapse. Forget about a mine tunnel held up with occasional wooden beams. The men laughed at me, and soon they began to explain what they were talking about in greater detail. They had a secret place all their own, and the place had old statues, stone statues that needed repairing, repair work that they would pay a high price for. I knew they were implying I should do the repair work, and I was interested. But I highly doubted that they could pay me as highly as they were saying they could. No offense, but these were factory workers. Maybe they were magical factory workers, but I didn't expect them to be able to make money magically appear. When they finally blindfolded me and brought me down to the mines, I discovered almost immediately that they were describing tunnels, not mines. Some of the areas seemed to be natural cave tunnels. Then we would reach an area where one wall was built with large bricks, but the other side was natural or chipped away at by hand. There were some other tunnels, or I guess you could call them rooms or chambers or caves, which seemed to have been carved a very long time ago by intelligent hands. It was strange to me how smooth some of these areas were, as if they were incredibly ancient. Another possibility is that these tunnels had been flooded with water for a great period of time, and then all sharp edges got smoothed away in that way. But that would take thousands of years, wouldn't it? None of these engineers were native or aboriginal, at least not full-blooded. They had names that suggested multiple backgrounds: Scottish, Middle Eastern, Anglo-Saxon. There was no one background for these men, and yet they told me they were the second generation to be guarding these tunnels, which had been discovered by their fathers. The more these men explained themselves to me, the more mysterious they seemed in my mind, and so I never fully became friends with them, as my father might have hoped. I was just a little too scared of their complete uniqueness. They were not ordinary men, and their motivations were unknown to me, so that made them unpredictable. Now, I did not know it initially, but most of the tunnels they were showing me in the beginning were under the homes we were living in. Rather than blindfolding me and leading into the woods, after they got used to me, we would enter the tunnels from this guy Larry's basement. I was later told that our homes were built on top of what were once mounds. We call them burial mounds these days, but they were originally entrances to underground areas, like a subway entrance in a major city today, only without the trains. It took until my third or fourth trip down there with them before they even brought me to the statues and reliefs they had been telling me that I should repair. When I was finally shown one of them, my breath was taken away for more than one reason. First of all, these things looked ancient. I mean, prehistorically ancient. Impossibly ancient. Too old to be in the United States type ancient. I felt that they needed to be in museums or being preserved by archaeologists, not a 23-year-old hippie with an art degree. Second of all, a number of the carvings, which were made into the natural stone that was there before the artists arrived, looked identical to the dogman I had seen snooping around outside my home those 2 times. When I told the engineers that I had seen this creature that these statues were of, they were quite impressed. and murmured among themselves, saying things I couldn't hear or understand. I demanded they tell me what this creature was, and they all laughed at me and told me it was their god. Then it was my turn to laugh at them. God is the Almighty, creator of everything. God is not a monster that creeps around in backyards at night like a criminal. God isn't some giant vermin hiding in the garage at night. Or rather, he is, at least in the sense that God is everything. But to worship a monster and call it a god, that seemed sick to me. It changed how I saw those engineers. They were pagans. They looked like Republicans who voted for Nixon, but they were the most ancient kind of pagans, right in America, working on modern machinery. When I told them God is not a monster, they told me that my God was dead, but their God was alive. They told me they fed their God and honored him because he is a living thing. He isn't just an idea. I saw the dogman. It was outside my home again that night. This time it didn't flee when I looked out the window at him. This time he just stood there, and that dogman stared back at me. And this time I was the one who broke the stare and ran off. It felt like he was asking me to do something for him. Maybe he was asking me to do the repairs of the stonework. Maybe he was daring me to do them. It wasn't until I had reluctantly agreed to perform the repairs that the engineers first brought me to see the dogman, their captured god. Deep in the tunnels there was a jail cell, and they had one of the monsters in there, inside the cell. It was being offered food of various kinds, and being spoken to as though it were royalty, but it was a prisoner, behind jail doors carved out of the same stone as all the statues and reliefs in those tunnels. And they couldn't see that. These men couldn't see what they were doing. They saw what they were doing as honoring this creature. It didn't sit right with me. One of the men called this animal Anubis, among a bunch of other names or titles that I did not recognize. I was surprised and put off by this, as I did not feel the beast resembled Anubis at all. Then I had to laugh at myself. It stood tall like a man on two legs, and it had a long snouted canine head. What else do you have to do to look like Anubis? Of course this looked like Anubis. And yet the idea of comparing this caged beast with an ancient Egyptian god, well, that rankled me. I felt like they were playing with semantics to give themselves an excuse to cage up a wild animal that should be allowed to roam free. In my mind, the visits I had gotten from that other beast took on a new meaning. Maybe that creature was asking me to free its friend. Maybe the caged beast is the other one's mate, or son, or father or mother. They both looked male to me, but what do I know about canine gender? Nothing, that's what. They had enough hair to cover up the naughty bits, so I can only guess. Now I realize that my generation is now associated with trying to silence dissent, and to debank anyone who thinks freely or says anything even slightly out of line. But back then, we actually wanted to stand for freedom. I don't expect you to believe me, but we hippie types were once against war and for freedom, believe it or not. Even Neil Young used to be in favor of freedom of both speech and movement, no matter how much he might deny that now. And I felt so strongly about it that I hatched myself a plan to sneak back to that dogman jail cell when it was unattended, which was often since it smelled terrible anywhere near the place, and quietly slipped the bolt out of the lock. I didn't open the jail cell door. However, I did everything short of that, and I ran away from that place, hoping to get out of there and home before the dogman got out. So, of course, that was when some of the engineers cornered me for a conversation. I tried to act like everything was normal, but I was sweating profusely, and the guys started to notice that I was behaving abnormally. I heard the sound of the stone gate being swung open, echoing in the tunnels behind me, and I was so nervous I felt like I was going to pass out, when the thumping of the monster's heavy footsteps grew closer. The others noticed the sound too. Nobody connected on what the sound was, until the monster turned a corner and we saw it. The trouble with us seeing the monster was that it also saw us, and it began to chase us. Well, we ran in single file down these narrow tunnels, with me in front and the other older, slower guys running behind. Being first in line really does matter in life. The monster couldn't reach me unless he had gotten through 4 grown men behind me. I didn't see how that would be possible, so at first I ran confidently toward escape. I had never really known death until I heard that dogman, that captured god, grab the first man behind us and savagely end the last chapter of his story. The next man, who is now last in line, screamed at all of us to run faster, and the other men screamed that I was getting us all killed. I knew it too. I was just as guilty as that monster. The men were referring to me running too slowly through the cramped tunnels, but I knew the whole truth. I knew how completely and utterly guilty I was of what was about to happen. I never joined the armed forces, and I was lucky enough not to get drafted back in those Vietnam days. But I had to listen to men dying behind me as I made my way to safety, barely avoiding the claws and teeth of the dogman myself. I knew I deserved the same fate as the others, but I ran like a coward, and I saved myself anyway. Well, obviously the group of engineers lost some of their top men that day, and the beast escaped into the night. I moved. I just left the state. My grandfather sided with the engineers and blamed me for everything. But my father did not know they were keeping some kind of exotic wild canine down there, and he sided with me. He had heard that the engineers had their own little secret society. He thought it was them imitating the Freemasons maybe, or possibly imitating the Loyal Order of the Buffaloes from Ralph Cramden and the Honeymooners. In either case, he didn't think they were engaging in real mystical practices, and keeping a wild animal penned up without any legal permit to do such a thing. He argued with my grandfather and called the tunnels an illegal private zoo. Now, my grandfather, on the other hand, felt that it was those magical practices of the engineers which kept things moving forward for the entire company. In his mind, that was a real religion they were practicing, and keeping their god happy with offerings was the only way to keep things moving ahead for the rest of us. But it wasn't a god. It was an animal, with the same needs that you or I have. It didn't do anything to be imprisoned, and it couldn't possibly bring good luck or good fortune to imprison a free being against its will. I know that my actions were careless and reckless, and that I should have found a better way to free the beast that didn't get men killed and almost myself as well. That was my terrible, tragic error, but not freeing the dogman itself. That act I will not apologize for, as much as I can never forgive myself for helping cause the death of those men. But as my father put it back then, if they hadn't kept a wild man-eating beast caged up for years, it wouldn't have escaped and eaten them alive. In his eyes, it was their own karma, although Dad would never have used a word like that. Still, that was how he felt, and he always kept a place at the family table for me around holiday time. Some years I even went back and visited, but my life was destined to happen far away from my family and their factory. My cousin runs the business now, and the sons of 2 of the old engineers are working there, but it's mostly new people. Some of the new engineers they've got even went to college. But I've asked around and I can't get any straight answers at all as to whether that secret society is still in operation or not. I wonder if those old statues are still down under the woods outside of town. And I wonder if the military ever did succeed in taking over the deeper tunnels, as they had been hoping to do back about 50 years ago. But most of all, I wonder who built those tunnels in the first place. And how long ago were they built? Whoever they were, they had a real talent for stoneworking, and they had a truly odd relationship with the creature that we nowadays refer to as the North American upright walking canid. aka the Midwestern Dogman. Well, this episode is brought to you by a large grant from the Godzilla Tim Foundation over in Ireland. I'd like to joke around as usual, but Tim donated this money because he heard the episode when I was talking about my cat friend Charlie leaving us a while back. It's something that's taking a long time to get over, as Charlie was not our oldest cat, and it's incredibly hard to think of how soon he was taken from us. I've actually put off thanking Godzilla Tim for this for a few days because it's more than a little painful to talk about even now. His best friend Ninja came to sleep with me last night, and I was very grateful because Charlie was really the only one that ever did that. I'm gonna miss him on the cold nights this winter. So thank you Godzilla Tim for being a real human being in a world of non-player characters. And now here's Henry. Hank?
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.